We all brush our teeth. I mean, I hope we do. At some point in our childhood, someone told us that it was really important to brush our teeth. And we believed them. We were convinced. Society from then on has largely embraced the act of brushing teeth in the morning, if not twice a day. No matter how tired we are, whether we're about to go to work or if we're on holiday, somehow we almost always follow through with this particular habit. It doesn't require that much willpower, and once we've made our way to the sink, brushing our teeth requires almost no conscious thought. Imagine if that was how effortless exercise was. Imagine if we were able to get up and work out, even if we didn't feel like it. Why are some habits so effortless while others are so hard to keep up? Then, of course, there's the other end of the spectrum that includes habits that are easy to keep up with, yet are precisely ones we don't want to have. But a vast majority of our actions day to day aren't actually automated. So imagine the influence a better understanding of the habit-forming process could have on our goals and the overall quality of our life. But first, have you ever wondered why we have habits in the first place? I mean, they are clearly useful to us. Life would suck if we had to think through every step of going to work or making our espresso. But our ancestors did not have such tasks, so why would they need habits in the first place? Well, it has to do with the neurochemical significance of a habit. A habit is a very streamlined set of actions, and it is optimized for our mental resources. Research in mice has shown that once habituated to the act of getting food from a particular place, the mouse's brain spends remarkably little energy compared to a mouse that actually has to discover it. Similarly, our human brains do not have all the resources in the world. Repetitive actions must be streamlined so that we have reserves for when we need them. Simply put, we have finite energy. Therefore, we gravitate towards routines and habitual actions. Now that we know why habits exist, let us try and understand their inner workings a little bit. We have to start by paying attention to one of the hallmarks of habit formation, and that is context. In fact, as far as psychology is concerned, habits are defined not for just being repetitive, but being repetitive in response to contextual clues. More technically speaking, habits are simply actions that are triggered automatically in response to contextual clues that have been associated with their performance. This context is key. As I just mentioned with the act of brushing teeth co-occurs with the act of waking up from bed. And since we all sleep every day, the contextual cue for brushing teeth is also ever present, which makes it a good habit. Other habits, such as eating healthy, require just as much contextual support. However, if that decision is made for the wrong reasons, such as looking good for a wedding as opposed to a higher quality of life, then the habit will be noticeably harder to maintain. Unlike brushing teeth, where the cue was constant, eating healthier to look better in the photos will only have temporary contextual co-occurrence. Once those photos have been taken, the motivation to maintain good health evaporates, and with it, the habit. Another interesting thing about contextual cues is that they are not as dependent on time as one may think. This means that the habit of brushing teeth is not so dependent on the time of day as it is on the act of waking up. Now, exposure to sunlight and those specific things do play a part, but what I'm trying to get at is that doing the same thing at the same time each day is not necessarily what creates the longest-lasting habits. This is great news, of course, as it means that we don't have to rely on the time of day to stick to our habits. Rather, we need a consistent string of actions to help us form habits. There is more to this. This string of actions is so powerful in helping us form habits that simply visualizing the set of actions can make it more likely for us to follow through with them. Neuroscientist and professor of neurobiology, Andrew Huberman, talks about this in his podcast referring to Hebbian learning. He uses the example of someone trying to make a habit of making espresso in the morning. Andrews says simply visualizing steps of making the espresso makes you more likely to actually get up and make that espresso. The procedural stepping through the steps of the recipe sets in motion the neurons that are going to be required. It's as though the dominoes fall more easily. All of which makes neurons, which are unlikely to fire, more likely to fire. But perhaps one of the most recognizable works on habits in General Elas been James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. In it, he writes, "Your habits are modern-day solutions to ancient desires, new versions of old vices. The underlying motives behind human behavior remain the same." Here, James is shining light on the tremendous power of habits to influence our actions and long-term trajectory. Because they stem from such deeply ingrained traits, he likes to make use of the compound interest analogy in this regard. Just 1% improvement over a year, which may seem minuscule in the moment, can compound to massive growth over a long enough time period. 37.78 times if you want to do the math. A 1% decline, on the other hand, will reduce us to nothing over the same period. James is essentially arguing about the need for smaller, more consistent changes to our lives, which will improve it in the long run. Instead of radically changing everything about our lives overnight, holding on to unrealistic goals that won't truly rid us of all enthusiasm, James recommends that we pursue smaller, more manageable changes consistently. We humans do not like change. We've never liked change, but we do tend to budge if the change is small enough. Facts that are radically different to the beliefs we already hold are simply discarded. Actions, similarly, that are simply too different from what we're used to, just don't stick to our routines very well. Relatively smaller changes that respect the finitude of our willpower allow us to sustain some semblance of enthusiasm over the transition. Expecting to suddenly write a book from having written nothing for months is not only not possible, but it will also leave you feeling miserable and tragically take away from the joy of the activity itself. Instead, it's much better to have small, clear, and actionable goals such as today. I will write 200 words. Now, if habits are indeed so important, we should especially pay attention to the bad ones. We've all got them. You know, the late-night snacking, the fast food, the TV binging, the phone overuse. We learn these habits just as quickly as the good ones, if not quicker, but they end up staying on for much longer. This is again down to the contextual cues and how easily they occur for bad habits. For example, let's say you end up snacking in periods of high stress. The cue here is high stress, and that is not something you have to put in effort to reproduce. It's just there when it's there. Unlike working out, for example, where you need to discipline yourself and come up with a routine, stress is always going to be there whether you like it or not. And when it's there, so is your urge to snack. Over time, your body optimizes this process so that once the craving arises, things like getting to the fridge and opening the door takes no conscious effort whatsoever. The neurochemical efficiency of habits and ease with which some of them can be learned means that bad habits are really hard to remove from our lives. People have tried different methods to remedy this. For example, setting notifications on their phones seems like an intuitive thing to do. At this point, we were all more or less aware of the effects of social media overuse and just general cell phone overuse. So some of us set timers to limit how often we can use or access the corresponding apps. But we all know what ends up happening, right? We simply override the timer when we want to. And soon enough, the act of overriding becomes second nature. I, for one, have overridden so many timers by now that it doesn't even register in my mind as a conscious decision. It just seems like an additional click I need to do to get my fix. I have done this with my alarm as well, so well in fact, that I can turn my alarm off in my sleep because I know exactly where the off button is on my phone. This is the perfect demonstration of what a habit is capable of. Used correctly, a habit can easily adapt and continue to optimize things to make them reflexive. Used incorrectly, however, they're ruthless, consuming any sort of effort to change. Anecdotal evidence aside, research has also shown that notifications don't seem to show any noticeable long-term impact on habit execution after an initial short-term spike. Harsher penalties, however, do show some impact. For example, cash penalties. But beyond an experimental setting, implementing a cash penalty is not a sustainable strategy for most people to improve themselves. A lot like screen timers on cell phones. These penalties too can be overridden in the correct environment. Andrew Huberman suggests that the key to getting rid of bad habits is not to punish ourselves so much, but rather pair each execution of the bad habit with a good one. So to add on to the snacking example, this might mean that every time you snack late at night, you want to pair it up with an easy-to-execute good habit, such as forcing yourself to meditate. This sounds a bit unintuitive because it makes it seem like you're essentially incentivizing yourself to do the bad thing more often, since there's a reward at the end of it. The good habit. However, Andrew says that in reality, what ends up happening is that you consciously rewire your brain to respond to the contextual cues differently. So now when you get really stressed, your response is twofold. First to snack and then meditate. Hearing the good habit with the bad one supposedly establishes enough of a level playing field that the wiring for the bad habit is no longer as dominant as it used to be. Besides, as a bonus, you end up with a good habit. The key to controlling our habits is down to a philosophical distinction. What is the reason for the habits we are trying to form? Do we want to become better versions of ourselves each day? Or do we simply want to check something off a bucket list? Neither is less moral, mind you. But the latter is not at all that different from the impulse gratification that good habits are supposed to help us avoid. If you enjoy the process, it all becomes a bit easier. What may seem monotonous and repetitive to some can actually be a slow, but meticulous stride towards a better view.